You wrote Surviving the Breakup,
Right.
and I think it's one of the most critically important books in the field. I know it was a turning point for me to really gain some perspective on what happened, and it was virtually the first that came out and said, "Hey, folks, let's look at
what's going on.
What's going on
families,
here.
His parents, his children, the parent-child relationships, and so on. After
Exactly.
separation. Yeah.
And the gist of it. I don't mean to reduce it or minimize in any, but I want to make certain that people know of it. The gist of the book, the conclusion is what? Surviving the breakup.
Well, first of all, the book described in great detail the reactions of children of different ages to their parents' divorce. And it was the first time that had been done. Because we had children that ranged in ages from 3 to 17. So we could divide it into preschool children and early school age children and latency kids, pre-adolescents, adolescents, and talk about some of the developmental differences in the way in which kids reacted to their parents' separation. That was probably the first third of the book. I would say that kind of, and also parents' descriptions of their own experiences of separation and divorce, and both emotionally and economically, who initiated this. I mean, all of these issues we described in this project. The second half of the book was a follow-up of the sample at 18 months after divorce and then 5 years after divorce. And what we were looking at was what happens to these children and these families. What happens to father-child relationships over time? What happens to mother-child relationships? How do these children fare longer term in comparison to themselves? We didn't have a group of children in married families as a comparison group. You know, it was so early in 1970 that we just needed to understand what these families and these children are experiencing, and so that's what this project contributed, I think, to the literature, and a lot of observations about the so-called visiting relationship. That was the word that was used back then, and sort of children's reactions to the amount of time they had with their fathers, typically as the non-resident parent. Very, very strong reactions that kids had way back then that were actually turned out to be quite seminal in terms of changing public policy around issues of contact with parents after separation and divorce.
Tender years presumption.
Well, there were tender years, but more than that, there was just kind of the assumption that kids would see their dads every other weekend. 4 days out of 28 days.
Yes.
12-day break between seeing their non-resident parent, which was usually dad, and the kids' incredible distress about not seeing a parent or seeing a parent for so little time. And certainly that was among our major, I think, findings that began to get people thinking in a different way about children's needs.